Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free wire tutorial today, we're going to go for something just a little bit different. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a collection of gemstone spheres around my home, and I'm going to show you how to make a sphere stand today. So these can also be used as miniature trinket bowls or as other ways to display pieces. Doesn't necessarily have to be a sphere, but they are lots of fun to create. So let's head down to the board, take a closer look, and then we'll make one together. So you could sit your sphere on a washer like this one, but it's not all that glamorous. So why don't we use a little dish or bowl to hold that neatly? So this is an example of what we're going to make together today. Like I said, you can use it for little trinkets and things or for displaying other pieces in your collection. Let's move this puppy up to the top corner. And then we'll pop this one down here. So I'm working with a slightly heavier wire today. This is 1.25mm, approximately 16 gauge. And we're going to start with around about a 12-inch length to create ourselves a spiral for the base. So this is around about 12 inches. I'm just going to flush cut this end. What we need to be super conscious of throughout today's piece is that we don't allow any scratchiness to occur on the design, because I'd like to keep my specimen spheres in really tip-top condition. So we'll begin by using our round nose pliers, or perhaps the smallest loop on your bail making pliers, or even your memory wire finishing pliers. We're going to start by creating almost a circle. And then in a traditional fashion that I make spirals, we're just going to push that into the non-dominant hand to start spiraling away. Now you can work on keeping that spiral exactly the same all the way around. And by that I mean the distance between the first pass of wire and the second pass of wire. You can graduate that out if you need to so that it gets slightly larger, or you can keep it the same kind of distance all the way around. Now if you start to find that the difference is occurring between those sizes, you can usually just draw that out slightly or push that in if you need to. Just take your time. The more time and practice you have with spirals, the better they get. So you can see that that's gone a little bit angular there. That's absolutely fine. We're going to warm that wire through, take it back a step, and just give that a little bit of help. There's another technique that you can use. It does usually give you a few more tool marks on your piece, but that's not actually something that really concerns me. I'm going to just tighten up here so that those edges are the same all the way around, the distance between the wires rather. And if it really is very, very naughty, just take your time. And again, warming that wire through will always give you a slightly better result. So when you get to the desired size, and it's usually a little bit smaller than the sphere itself because we want those edges to taper out much like a classic fruit bowl. When you get to the end, we're going to put a small loop and bring that loop back in towards the spiral. So I'm just going to show you one that I completed yesterday. And that was with using around about a 12-inch length of that heavy wire. And I've just turned a loop on the end, which I've just tried to bring as close and neat as possible to the rest of that spiral. Now you can make that a little bit more rounded, but what that does mean is that the loop sticks out a little bit and you don't have such a beautiful spiral shape. So I've gone for a bit more like a pear drop shaped loop on the end, and if I just open that out for a second, I can give that a bit of a squish together to make it nice and neat and tidy. You'll notice that I did indeed just make a huge mistake, but I'm going to leave that in the video to show you that working with a copper like this, which is a raw copper, is absolutely delightful because I can then bring that back pretty much to where I want it to be. I've just tightened that little loop on the end up. So if I grab my block and my chasing hammer, we're just going to add a little bit of work hardening to this spiral base on our design. Now before I begin hammering, I'm going to try and do this section by section. And what I'm going to do is press down really firmly on at least half of the spiral whilst I hammer the other half. And I'm putting quite a lot of pressure down. You can see the tips of my fingers have gone slightly white there because I don't want the wire to be moving around at all. I want to retain that shape. So I'm just going to move that through about 90 degrees. So I've already hammered this half, but again, I'm going to hold this really firmly down whilst I go all the way across that spiral. Another quarter turn. And I'm paying extra attention to this little bit on the end where the spiral finishes. It is always preferable to not hit yourself with the hammer, so do take your time. And when you get to that last little section, what I'm going to try and do is use my forefinger to just pull this tail of wire back in towards the last turn on the spiral. Give that a really good pinch, and I'm also going to strike ever so slightly from the outside angle. You won't notice it, it's very, very subtle, but it should also help keep the end loop touching the preceding spiral wire. One of the reasons for applying work hardening in a design like this is not just to make a slightly stronger finished project, it's to help us when we weave the two component parts together. So for the next part of today's tutorial, we're going to be making the wall. So it's the edge of the bowl or the sphere stand, whatever you want to think of it, or use it as indeed. We're going to make a second piece and then we're going to wire those two pieces together. Now for this piece, I would very much recommend working from the reel so that you can get a length of sidewall, as it were, to the exact requirements of the piece that you're making on the day. Now I have a bit of a scrap left over from some work I was doing earlier, so I'm going to start the demonstration with this. Now, if you have the 2-prong bail makers, it's really useful to use them. However, I'm going to be working with my 6-step bail makers today, and I'm going to be working on step number 4. Now, the idea with this is that each of the loops is the same size. So if you are working with multi-step bail makers, try to remember which one you're using, because that's a classic failing of mine. I just forget what it is I'm doing. So we're going to start off by making a loop as ever, and as I said, I'm using number 4 on my bail makers. So if I make that loop and then retract out of the way, what I'm going to do is just make sure that that cut end sits flush against the piece of wire that's coming away. So I'm just going to give that a quick squish and make sure that it's good and tight up against that next section that we're working with. So give that a really hearty squish to get you going. Now the sequence is going to be, we're going to go around, we're going to come back over the top on ourselves, back down to the bottom where we're going to do a loop-de-loop. So it's a really easy one to get into as soon as you've worked out the system. So let's just hold that wire in position to begin with. If I move the bowl up to the top there, you should be able to see uninterruptedly. So let's draw the wire all the way around, and I'm going to pass that wire underneath the section that I'm already working on and just allow that to sit down against the pliers. So I've got, it's not a perfect circular loop, rather it's more like a teardrop, an inverted teardrop shape. That's absolutely fine. I'm more than happy with that. I'm going to give this scrap of wire a bit of a warm because it's seen some action. It's therefore a little bit tough. Let's turn the wire over the other way. So remembering which number you're using on your bail makers, we're going to make a loop. And this time, instead of a single loop, we're going to go all the way around. Let's draw that wire underneath again. And then you can move the pliers or your hands, whatever makes sense. And what we're going to do is to draw the wire over again so that you get 1.5 or 1 and a bit turns of wire around that baseline. So what you're looking to do, the starting point's a bit different. That's just a single loop. Now can you see how uneven they are? So what I need to do is to move my loop-de-loop up closer to that pear drop loop, remembering what number we're using. I'm going to pop that back into position, and I'm just going to push that towards the preceding loop and then draw the tail away in a straight line. As long as you're warming your wire as you're going, that should be perfectly achievable. And just give that a bit of a twitch until it sits. Now you can see that those two loops are now much more symmetrically spaced. And I'm happy with the size and shape. You can, of course, just take a second to give that a bit of a nibble with your chain nose pliers if you need to. So we're going to move on to repeating that little pear drop, inverted pear drop again, remembering what number we're using on those bail making pliers. So bail making pliers number 4, draw the wire all the way around underneath and bring that back down at the diagonal. So if I remove the pliers, you'll see that we're looking to create, there are 2 basic types. Apart from the end, which is a single loop, we've got an inverted pear drop at the top and then a 1.5 turn loop at the bottom. And you'll just keep going like that until you have enough of this edging strip or sidewall to fit around your chosen spiral. So just keep going, keep trying it up against the piece. You could even measure it, who knows, rulers were invented for something just like this. I'll admit it, I don't really use rulers very often, unfortunately. I will use a ring mandrel if I'm creating for a client and they need a specific size, but for the most part, I'm just winging it. So let's head back down to the board and see if the strip I created earlier actually fits my spiral. So just as a matter of interest, and in case you're into maths and the such, I started with a scrap of around about 10 inches, just to see how much of that side wall I could create. This is about 2.5 inches. So I don't know if it's a 4 down to 1 ratio, or if that's just because I'm using number 4 on my bell makers and that's the kind of angle I was after. So definitely work off the reel and you'll end up with something like this. Now I both started with a simple loop and ended with a simple loop, and there's a reason for that. So what we're going to do now is to start just very gently shaping this side wall around. And what I want to do is to just put some curvature into the little sections of wire between each of those loops so that you can begin to see curvature. And it's very much better to start with a very mild bend like this and work your way up to getting that all the way around your chosen spiral. So if I do find that this is a little bit short, one of the things that you can do with this type of manoeuvring with wire, I suppose, is you can very gently just adjust it very softly, and you'll see that I've done the same kind of opening up technique on each of these little inverted pear drop shapes, just because it means that they then will still look the same. So I'm going to keep forming this around until it sits on a rounded shape, and I can offer that over the top of my spiral base. You can also apply a little bit of bending into the loops themselves, and that will certainly help you to get that form. So if I just pinch this together for a second, we're going to have a look and see if it's going to be about the right size. It's not going to be far off, I don't think, by the time it's done. Now we've got that shaped to a round. What I now need to do is to taper the inverted pear drops so that they sit outwards. And the way I'm going to do that, let's just move that top section out of the way, is I'm just going to very softly push them outwards and away. So gripping those 2 lower loop-de-loop sections and pushing the inverted pear drop section between them away. So it looks tricky, I promise you it's not. It's just a lot of tiny little movements, not doing too much at once. And if I bring those 2 end sections back together, you'll see now, even with the overhead camera, that those inverted pear drops are sticking further away, and that will most likely fit my spiral just fine. If I'm still not having quite enough wire, again, I can just tease those little loop-de-loops further apart. You could of course do them much tighter together and keep going and do a few more than I did. So let's just make sure that those inverted pear drops are sticking outwards. As you can see on the finished product there, they're much further out than the loop-de-loops at the bottom of the design. and we just need to make fine adjustments until this sits neatly on your chosen spiral base. So it does take time, and I'm sorry if that's boring to watch. We will get there though, I promise. So that looks like it's actually going to fit really nicely. This one's gone a bit wild, so I'm just going to draw that in slightly. That's starting to resemble what I want it to resemble. So the wire that I've chosen to put everything together is a 0.5 or 24 gauge, and I'm working with a scrap length of around about 15 to 18 inches. Always err on the side of caution and go for the longer length, so probably go for 18 inches of that 0.5 or 24 gauge. And what we're going to do is to start by securing the next inner spiral to the outermost spiral. So if I pop the wire just underneath the spiral and bring a tail of around about 1/2 inch through, just fold that over the top. I'm just going to flip this around in my hands so that it's easier for me to hold. What I'm going to do is to take that little 1/2 inch tail and wrap it a couple of times around that spiral. Using the pliers will help me to kind of show you what's going on. Draw that tail up and inside, all the way around, and I've got 3 good wraps there, which is plenty sufficient on a wire of this gauge, making sure that that end is tucked away neatly. What we're then going to do, if I just invert this again, is push that around so that it sits next to that little ending loop that we created. And what I'm going to do is bring the tail of my finer gauge wire up inside that loop, making sure I'm actually working with a scrap that I found on my desk. So I'm going to just pop my fingers inside that loop as it draws tighter so that it doesn't knot and get into any difficulty. And I'm just going to wrap twice around the outer spiral and the inside of that loop that we created. I'm going to push the tail down inside the spiral like so, and just use tension to pull that neatly together. That's going to give our spiral base some nice, neat rigidity and strength. So again, I've just used my finger to make sure that that didn't get all knotted up. And then you can push the leading edge down if it's easier for you inside that spiral. And then I'm just going to scooch that all over. When I'm happy that that's neat and tidy, I'm going to give it a very, very delicate touch, just to ensure that that sits as neatly as possible. I'm not absolutely crushing it. I'm not going terribly strongly with it. So what I'm going to do next is to start attaching the wall section. I'm going to start on the open loop on this side. So if I just hold that together to begin with, it's going to be a piglet and wiggle around. So let's take the tail through the loop. Let's do this one thing at a time, all the way through that first loop, and then just hold it in position. And then I'm going to push the leading edge down. We're looking on the underside at the moment, but I'm going to push it down inside that spiral. So let's push the leading edge through and draw it all the way out. Now, if I pop that down into position, you'll see what we're doing. We're starting to attach the side wall, as it were, the supporting wall, to the spiral itself. And if you need to make any adjustments to the side wall as you go, you absolutely can. It's not a drama to do so. So we've got one loop at this moment around the spiral, the outer edge of the spiral, and through the first loop on our wall. Let's just bring that up into the light. There we go. So I'm going to do 2 wraps around that loop. So if I push that all the way through, just pull that all the way through so you can see where we're attaching, and then push the leading edge of that wire back down inside the outermost reaches of that spiral. We've got 2 points of connection between the loop-de-loop beginning and the spiral itself. What we're going to do now is just a couple of lazy wraps just around that outer edge of the spiral. So you can either push the leading edge through, as I showed you a second ago, or you can push the end tail of that wire through and then just draw that around. So a lazy spiral. Let's push the leading edge through this time, a lazy spiral, and you can see we're building up a spiral on the spiral, which I think is a really attractive motif. So let's go for one more. And then what we're going to do is just pop everything down on the board and see what we need to do next. So I think I may need to slightly tighten up. I think I overstretched my sidewall. So if I very, very softly push these pieces back into their original position. That should tighten it up just enough to fit really neatly. So once you've got your lazy spiral, you can see I've got my lazy spiral going around the outer spiral. I think probably I'll go for one more just around the spiral itself. And then at the next juncture, I'm going to wrap on the loop-de-loop section. We don't add any wire to those inverted pear drops. We're only wiring on the loop-de-loop sections. That's the strongest part of the sidewall. So we're going to go for 2 wraps here. So you can make a little bit of a needle if it helps you. Let's just make that needle point in the correct direction. And I'm going to push that needle through the loop-de-loop and then through the outermost wire on that spiral. And if I pull that down, you'll see that that's starting to knit everything together. So my sequence is 2 wraps to join the loop-de-loop to the outermost spiral. And you can make those nice and neat and tidy together. And then I'm going to go for some lazy spiraling around the outermost spiral before I double wrap again at this point, and so on and so forth until I get back to the other end, and I'll show you what to do then. So if I show you the underside of the sphere holder, you can see that I've gone all the way around with those lazy spirals, and then there's 2 loops through the loop-de-loop connecting everything together, and I've stopped just towards the end of my last lazy spirals. Now before I cut this wire away, I just want to make sure that everything is going to connect securely together. So you can see that my 2 lower loops, my beginning and end loop, match up, and that's so that from above it's imperceptible where the beginning and ending is. You may want to go for slightly more than 4 upper inverted pear drops and 4 lower loop-de-loops. It might look slightly nicer with a larger number. I think there's 5 on this one. Yes, there are. I can count to 5, go me. So you do have options about how large or how detailed or how close together you make those loops, but this one ended up as 4 and 4. So what I'm going to do is just unfurl this last little loop that we created at the very end, and I just need to see how much wire I've got to work with. And because I've allowed myself a complete loop, there's going to be plenty here to connect into that little gap that we created on the outside of the spiral. So what we just need to do is make sure that everything looks super, and you can either, dependent on how your piece lies, you can connect onto that spiral ending that we made. If I show you on the example piece, the end of my upper section just loops through that section that we made at the outside of the spiral. So that's one way to do it. Because it's going to look neater here, what I'm going to do is to take this tail end of the sidewall section and just make a teeny tiny loop into the beginning loop on the side section. So I know that I can trim away a little of this wire just to make it easier to see what's happening. So I've now got a shorter section. And what I'm going to do is to put a little bit of a bend on that and just bring it through the loop that we made at the start of the wall, the start of the sidewall. So you can just see if I pull that out and push that back through, you can see what we're doing. We're connecting the 2 sections together. And when I pull this up the other way, I'm just going to draw that tail of wire back in the direction it came from, and just assess how that looks. Again, what we don't want is any sharp edges touching on. This is a piece of sphalerite that's been cut into a beautiful sphere, and I don't want that to have any scratches on it. So what I'm going to do is possibly take a teeny tiny extra piece just off the end. If I can just isolate what I'm talking about, it's the hook that we've just made. So if I take a teeny tiny extra bit, and always take your time when cutting in to a design like this, that's gone I don't know where. And what I want to do is to, you can see that teeny tiny end bit, I'm just going to push that outwards so that it sits against the sidewall. So that looks relatively decent. You've got 4 uppy bits and 4 downy bits. Let's look at this tail of wire we have available to us here. If you want to go belt and braces on security, and I suggest that you do, I'm going to post that up inside the design for a second. And then I think what I might do, just to hold this loop as low down on the piece as possible, I'm just going to get a bit of tension here. There we go. So that's pulled that last little arm on the side wall as low down as it will go. And what I'm going to do is just push that back through, and I'm going to wrap 3 times. Let's get some real tension on there. There we go. Nice and tight. I'm going to wrap 3 times around this section of the wall of the design. That's 2. That's 3. And I'm going to tighten up those coils, bring that wire over the top, and then again looking twice. I've got the shakes today, sorry. Just to make sure that's nice and tidy. Poke it away and make it smooth so that it won't hurt any of your beautiful gemstones. So let's have a look. Yes, I absolutely could have made that slightly neater, but overall I'm very happy with how that's sitting. Let's see if it functions as a sphere holder. It absolutely does. So you've got a couple of different options on how you can make this. This was made in a 1mm or 18 gauge wire. I would absolutely trust it as a little trinket bowl, or maybe as a very small sphere holder. Hold on. I've got a little beautiful rainbow citrine over here that sits on my desk all the time. That will work beautifully for a smaller sphere. But because my sphalerite is quite a weighty piece, I want to make sure that that's in that heavier wire. So the example piece that I made earlier has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those inverted pear drops and 5 of the lower loops, all in that same 1.25 or 16 gauge wire. And my sphalerite's very, very happy to live there. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed making that sphere stand. Could be a trinket bowl. When I first made it, I made it as a trinket bowl, and then I thought, no, actually that looks really good as a sphere holder. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know that I have lots of fun coming up with these projects for you. Do enjoy your day, and I look forward to seeing you back here again soon. If you're liking the content, do please drop a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel. I upload new free tutorials every week on a Sunday. Bye for now.